and you won't come to transgress. And what are the three things? Ayin ro'ah, the eye is watching. Ozen shama'at, the ear is listening. V'chol ma'asecha v'sefer dichtabim, and everything that you do is recorded. So when I was a kid, trying to understand that if I were to go into a room that was inside another room, inside another room, inside 100 rooms, how could God see what I was doing? And I actually thought about it, and I figured out that every time I would open the door to go into the next room, he can sneak in with me, Anyway, but if you're teaching that Mishnah to children today, and you tell them that the eye is watching, the ear is listening, and everything is recorded, they'll pick up their cell phone and they're going to say, what's the big deal, What's the big deal, God? I have this too. How would you teach that today? The point is that what the Mishnah is really about is that Hashem cares about what we're doing. So he's paying attention to what we're doing. And so you look at what do you look at? You look at what you're interested in. What do you listen to? What you're interested in. What do you record? What do you take note of? What you're interested in. Anyway, so much for the technology. Okay. Pinchas, one of the not so easy Torah portions to understand. So let's just read a little. The story begins at the end of last week's Parshat. And everybody's over 18, I imagine, here. So we could look at that. You're sure?
I'm sure. I'm not talking about me.
Yeah. You're talking about everybody else, right? Okay, so at the end of Parshat Balak is where the story begins. So last week we had the Bilam, this great prophet who's the only other prophet whose prophecy is actually recorded in the Torah. Right? Besides Moshe Rabbeinu, we don't have anybody's prophecies recorded in the Torah. Yaakov Avinu, when he's giving blessings to his children, so his blessings are prophetic and so on. But as a matter of fact, when he gathers them together, he says, let's get together and let me tell you what's going to happen in the end of days. But he never actually tells them what's going to be. So this great prophet wants to come and curse the Jews, and here, why don't you give me that blue chumash, and here, Moshe, you can have a chumash. And anyway, so Hashem doesn't let him curse us, and instead everything turns into blessings, right? But then at the end, he advises Balak about a particular strategy, and that is namely to seduce us sexually and then lead us into idolatry, and that would be our end. So that's what actually happens. And the Midianites send out their daughters, right? And if you look at the beginning of Perik Chafei, chapter 25, we'll just read it quickly, right? Vayeshev Ha'am is at the end of Balak. Vayeshev is chapter 25, Perik Chafei. Is that finish good for you, Jess?
Yeah, sorry, what passage?
The first one.
Oh.
It's at the end of Balak. We're not starting at the beginning of the Parshat, right? Yeah. Here's another one with you did it. Maybe you want to give this to give it to her. Give this to her. Find your place, okay? Aleph. Vayeshev Yisrael Bashitim. So the Jews were camping in a place called Shittim, and interesting name. It's probably referring to the kinds of trees that were there. But in any case, that word Shittim is the word that's used by Yesod, and it's also used in the Gemara. It says, "Ein adam chotei ela im kein nichnas bo ruach shtut." The person doesn't transgress unless the spirit of folly overcame him. And the spirit of folly basically is that I think that I can go into a bubble and do a transgression and then come out of the bubble and everything's going to be just the same. That's the right? Somebody comes along with Russian horror, some slander or whatever it is, and and we think, oh, I'm not going to really be damaged by listening to it. I know that it's a big transgression, but it's not so gefährlich, like. Or like I once heard that somebody goes over to this Baal Tshuva guy in shul and he says, "How long are you going to be a Baal Tshuvas?" He says, "Till I talk during Torah reading." Okay. But like we think that this is just a little thing. This is just a little thing, and it's like I still maintain my status, right? In any case, so Yeshivat Simchat Shlomo, the Jews were camping in this place called Shittim. And the people started having sexual relations with the daughters of Moab. So notice the relationship between the first verse and the next verse is so they invited them to the sacrifices that they were offering to their idols. The people ate. So then that led them to bowing down to their idols. And then they connected themselves with the idol called Baal Pa'or, which is a strange type of idol. Rashi says that it was sort of like a bathroom idol. People used to do what you do in the bathroom in front of it, or they would have sex in front of it. But and Vayicharaf Hashem b'Yisrael, and Hashem got really angry. And his anger flared against the Jewish people. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, so Hashem said to Moshe, Kach et kol rashei ha'am v'hoka otam l'Hashem, take all the leaders and judge them, in other words, those who were worshipping idols, and display them, in other words, execute them before God, neged hashamesh, in full view, v'yashuv charon af Hashem Yisrael, so that the anger of God shall turn back from the Jews. Vayomer Moshe el shoftei Yisrael, so Moshe told the judges, Hilu isha nashava nismadim b'Baal Pa'or, you got to go out and execute the people who are worshipping this idol. V'hinei ish mibnei Yisrael, and behold, there was this man from among the Jews, Ba, and notice he's called Ish B'nei Yisrael, right? It's not a simple title. He's not a very honorable person. He came by Yaakov and he took this Midianite woman that he brought her with him, Le'enei Moshe B'nei Kol Adat B'nei Yisrael, and right in the front of Moshe and in full view of everybody, right? And started having sex with her right in front of everybody. The Hema Bochim and Moshe and the leaders, they were just standing there crying, Petach Ohel Moed, at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Vayar Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, so Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron HaKohen, saw this. Vayakam mitoch ha'edah, he arose from within the community. Vayikach romach biyado, he took a spear. ויבוא אחר איש ישראל אל הקופה וידקור את שניהם את איש ישראל ואת האישה אל כפתה. He speared the two of them together as they were cohabiting, right in that part of the body. But he יצר המגפה and מיעל בני ישראל, and that stopped the plague that had started against the Jews. ויהיו המתים במגפה 24,000. The number of people who died in this plague was 24,000 people. So here's Pinchas, he acts zealously, he acts like a zealot. And the Torah tells us that he stopped the plague. Okay. So now the question is, what are we going to do with Pinchas? Is he guilty of murder? Or did he do something courageous, right? So, I don't know about you, but I imagine that, I know to myself and to most of us, if we would hear of a zealot behaving this way today, we would be pretty infuriated, right? You too, me too, okay? And in fact, had Zimri turned against Pinchas and killed Pinchas, Zimri would have been innocent, because Pinchas was considered like he was pursuing, like he was a raider. He was a raider. He was pursuing somebody. Now there is a halacha that Haboel Aramid Kanain Pogim Bo. So that's one who is having intercourse with an Arabite woman. A zealot is allowed to attack him and kill him. But it's only true if the person is a true zealot. In other words, if there's any indication that this person is not really a character, a full a zealot with complete integrity as a zealot, okay?
Doesn't every zealot think that they're...
Well, we would check the person's behavior. If we see that there are areas that he's not such a zealot, then he would be guilty of murder. Okay? So
how would you define that? Is it always...
We're going to talk in a second. We're going to talk about it in a second, okay? But let's just go on and see what goes on here. So now the Parshat continues. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, saying, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen heshibet chamati. Pinchas, the son of Elazar, son of Aaron HaKohen, turned back my anger, me'al bnei Yisrael, from the children of Israel, b'kano et kinati, as he avenged my jealousy b'tocham in their midst. V'lo chibiti et bnei Yisrael b'kinati, and because of what he did, I didn't wipe out the children of Israel because of my jealousy. Lachein, therefore, emor, declare, let everybody know, hineni noten lo et briti shalom, that I'm giving him my covenant of peace. Now, I don't know how the word shalom is printed in your Chumash, but in the Sefer Torah, the word shalom over here, look at the Vav. If it's not printed that way by you, there'll be a note on the side. That the Vav is a Vav Ketia. It's a broken Vav. Okay? So there's a whole bunch of discussion as to why is that, but we'll talk about it a little bit, I hope. But in any case, let me just show it to you if you want to see it inside, what it looks like. I remember once I got an aliyah for this aliyah, and this aliyah usually goes to a kohen. So I happened to be in the shul at the time there was no kohen, so I had never had an aliyah looking at Parshat Pinchas inside. And we're reading the Torah, and I see the Vav is broken, and I say, the Vav is not good, right? And they say, no, you're just not even aware, right? It is a Vav Ketia. So it's right here. So it shows up in different ways. Like over here, in this is a Svari type of script, so the Vav is shorter than it usually is. In other scripts, the Vav actually has a break in it. In the leg of the Vav, there's actually a break in it. Okay. So I'm giving him my covenant of peace. What does that mean? What is Hashem saying that I'm giving him my covenant of peace? Anybody have any ideas? Huh? Well, he's going to say it. The next verse is going to tell you that it's priesthood, right? But still, basically, it's apparently Pinchas is sort of in danger over here. Like everybody's really mad and angry at him, right? So Hashem is coming and saying, no, what he did was good. He actually stopped. He actually stopped the plague. Okay. So there are
somebody did that today, and there was a plague and it stopped, then it would definitely be
I don't know.
sign, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, today's a whole different story. We're on a whole different level of divine consciousness. Over here, you're talking about people who stood at Mount Sinai, who saw the giving of the Torah, who many of them had witnessed the Exodus from Egypt and all the miracles that were going on the 40 years in the wilderness and so on. So in other words, the presence of God was definitely far more palpable than it is today. Okay, so any act against against Hashem was far more significant, whereas today we're basically in the category of tinok shenishba. We're like a child that was raised among the Gentiles, and even the people who did grow up in observant homes and so on. The Hashem is very, very concealed now. So for example, all the laws in the Torah that the Beit Din would have the authority to execute someone for violations of Shabbos or sexuality laws and so on. There is no Beit Din today because we don't have a Beit HaMikdash. In other words, it's only when the presence of Hashem is far more revealed than it is now that such transgressions are considered to be like real acts of rebellion against God. Okay? But but if somebody did that today, I mean, there are stories of people acting zealously here in Israel, and some positive and some negative, and also during the Holocaust. Like I remember there was this philosopher in Toronto. Maybe you heard of him because you're from Toronto. Emil Fackenheim, a Jewish philosopher. So he once was giving a talk in Montreal, and he spoke about the Nazis rounded up the Jews of a certain community, and the rabbi was giving a talk to the people about the whole thing about dying, al kiddush Hashem, dying for the sanctification of Hashem's name. And in the meantime, there was this butcher from the community, and he jumped up from this grave that they were all supposed to lie in, and he jumped at the Nazi guard, and like he literally bit his throat out. So Fackenheim was asking, who of the holier man? Okay. You don't have to answer. I'm just saying that it's an interesting question. Who of the two is the holier man? Who of the two, right? Who acted correctly in that situation? And maybe the answer is both. I don't know. But in any case, so first Hashem is coming and saying, "I'm giving him a covenant of peace," meaning to say that Hashem is giving a stamp of approval, so to speak, right? But obviously it's more than just stamp of approval, because the words Briti Shalom, covenant, Shalom is one of God's names, right? In other words, it's far more significant than just saying, okay, like, he's okay, let him go, type of thing. And further, the next verse, Hashem says, and now, as a result of this, Hashem is giving Pinchas the covenant of being a Kohen, him and his children, because even though Pinchas was the grandson of Aaron the Kohen, at the time that Aaron and his sons were anointed, their children who were alive at that time did not automatically become Kohanim. Just Elazar and his 4 sons, and any one of the children born afterwards would be a Kohen. Pinchas was already alive, and therefore he wasn't a Kohen until now. Hashem makes him a Kohen. Okay? So Tachat Asher Kinei Lelohav, because he took vengeance for his God. Vayichaper al Bnei Yisrael, and he brought atonement on the children of Israel. And then the Torah tells us, V'shem Ish Yisrael HaMukeh, the name of the Jewish person that was killed, Asher Hukait HaMidyanit, that was killed together with the Midianite woman, was Zimri ben Salu. Nisi Beit Avla Shimoni, he was nothing other than the prince of the tribe of Shimon. In other words, we're not talking about some, somebody who hung around in the discotheques in Manhattan or whatever it is. We're not talking about that. We're talking about somebody who's like the prince of the tribe of Shimon, right? Okay, very, very important person. So he wasn't stam an adulterer. He wasn't just out to show that he didn't care about anything. On the contrary, they say that he actually acted with a positive intention, and it was his way of protesting against the plague he was protesting against Moshe Rabbeinu. You married a woman that wasn't Jewish, Torah, right? So what's going on here? So it's like what's happening here? Like and this was his his kind of act of protest against the plague that was taking place, but in any case, he wasn't an ordinary person. He was a leader in Israel, right? One of the 12 top leaders. The Shem Ha'isha HaMukan, the name of the woman that was killed, Hamidyanit, the Midianite woman, was Kazbi Bat Sur. She was a princess. She was the daughter of Sur. Rosh Umot Beit Av B'Midyan. He was the leader of many tribes in Midian. Ooh, right? So you're talking about like two top people, right? From the side of the Midianites, you see how corrupt they were, that they send their daughters out to seduce the Jews, even the princess amongst them, and Zimri ben Salu, who's the head of the tribe of Shimon. So one thing that you always have to keep in mind is that Sefer Bamidbar, the Ishbisser refers to it as the Torah of mistakes. From chapter 9 and on, we've had one tragic story after another tragic story, right? And there's a statement in the Talmud, Ein Adam Omeid Aver Halacha Eleim Kein Nichshal Ba, that a person doesn't really get the importance of a Jewish law without first having faltered over it. So the Torah in Bamidbar is teaching us the deepest things that we need to learn as a result of the mistakes that we made. Okay, so you know that we have all these laws about separating between Jews and non-Jews to prevent intermarriage, right? Like stam pitam, like non-Jewish bread, even if it's kosher. If you have a choice, then you shouldn't be eating it, because that would lead you to drinking their wine, and if you're going to drink their wine with them, that'll lead to intermarriage. So there's definitely a strong concern that the leadership always has to have. What are we going to do about intermarriage, right? It's a serious problem. I know that's, I'm expected to, because you think I'm an octogenarian, but I'm not an octogenarian. But in any case, back in 1965, there was this Jewish sociologist at Yeshiva University by the name of Marshall Sklar, and he did a study on intermarriage back in 1965, and he did a forecast of what's going on. And I don't remember the exact statistic of back in 1965, but it was already significant. Okay, and he was saying, "Wake up, everybody! This is a trend that's beginning." And you know that there are communities in America now where intermarriage is like 80%. Mamish, like Jewish communities are pretty much disappearing in that respect. Back in 1988, 1989, there was a big Jewish population study that was done. And I was attending a workshop in Boston at the time, and one of the authors of the questionnaire for the study came to meet with us. It was a group of educators. We were having this workshop in a place in Boston called Brookline. You know, they have a school there that starts with an H. So I was there for 2 weeks. Then they discovered, and so he comes to us, to all these Jewish educators, and he says, what, in your opinion, do we need to do to what's going to work best to prevent intermarriage? So I acted stupid. And I said, well, if I was starting a business, I would look around to see what did I do. And I would pick out the most successful of those companies. And I would study carefully what do they do that I would copy and do the same thing so that my business should be successful also. So if you want to know what's necessary and what's needed to prevent intermarriage, why don't you identify a community that's really strong and that is very, the kids grow up and they're Jewish, etc., and they marry Jews. And what kind of a question are you asking? So he said, well, what he really meant was, what's the minimum that we need to do in order to keep our Jewish kids in living as Jews, which I knew was what he was after. So it's a serious question, and depending on where you're living, and it's a serious question everywhere, because if you when you read the Sefer Shoftim in other books in Tanakh, you'll see one of the often repeated phrases is the Jewish people saying that they want to be kechol hagoyim, we want to be like all the nations. Right? You might be a star kid in your class, but there are times where you wish that you weren't so advanced over everybody else. Right? It happens because it is sort of like a bit of a barrier, Anybody here knew Meir Abisera besides you and me? You've heard of Michel Abisera? He used to be the one that the Rebbe's for Bringens. He was the whistler. He was a wild guy, very special man. He was nifter about 3 years ago. So he studied. He wrote a book on macrobiotics. He studied with Seiji Ozawa together by their master in macrobiotics and so on. Very special man. So he would talk to large crowds of people, and mamish, he had these Motzei Shabbos, Melava Malkus, that would go from Motzei Shabbos till Sunday morning, 10 o'clock. All the musicians would come and so on. He was a very special man. He never asked. He and his wife never asked anyone to leave their house. And I know somebody that I brought there to meet him for 15 minutes, and she stayed there for 2 weeks. And as a matter of fact, last year there was somebody here who had gotten married, and his parents came for Shabbos, and I don't remember who it was right now, but she was sitting right there, and she said, yeah, I told the story about him. She says, I was in their house for 9 months, and after 9 months, Esther Abisera was finally indicating to me that, maybe you should go to study there by Friedman at Beis Chana or something like that, but they were Achnasat Orchim, unbelievable, okay? So back in the 60s, he was like a guru already, he could have easily been a guru. He told me that people would come up to him after giving a talk and they'd say, here's my car keys, you can have my car, or here's the keys to my house, you can have this. And he said, thank God he never took any of that stuff. In any case, so he gave a talk somewhere in San Francisco, and one of his people says to him, Mayor, I want you to come and meet this young man. He's like really, really wealthy, and I think he'll want to support the work that you're doing. And this guy was living in the penthouse of some ritzy hotel in San Francisco. Anyway, they come into the hotel and it's all gilded and everything. And Mayor says, I'm going to break something. Like, he couldn't stand that kind of stuff. Anyway, he got into the elevator safely, and they go up to the penthouse, and they knock on his door. And the guy's opening the door, and he's wearing like a $20,000 smoking jacket. And Mayor takes one look at him, and he says, I know this guy. And he shoves the door open, and he jumps the guy, and he starts beating him up. And the guy who brought him says, Mayor, you're crazy. You don't know who you're dealing with. What are you doing? And Mayor's just punching away at him. And the guy says, oh, it's so good. It's so good. It's so good. And what happened was that this man had become very wealthy very quickly. And all his friends put him up on a pedestal. And he was up there on the pedestal, very lonely. And Mayor he intuited that right away, and he realized the best thing I could do for this guy is knock him off his pedestal. so he just almost did it, like. But don't. If you're mayor, don't just go and try it now. Don't go try it so simple, okay? But one day he walked into the furniture store in Crown Heights, and this black guy is in the store there. The mayor just turns around and whacks him, and the guy looks at him and he says, "Hey man, you're okay." But he was like the Rebbe's clown, like he had that crazy intuition that don't try to copy him in any case. But the Jewish people, to a certain extent, I mean, the fact of the matter is, I read that there's like something like 200 foreign journalists here in Israel, 5 of which are covering the rest of the Middle East, and 195 are just watching what are the Jews doing, okay? So Jewish people, like Rav Steinsaltz says, we over the years, we developed the skill of knowing how to blend into all kinds of societies, right? And people, there's this natural thing of why is everybody looking at me? I'm just like everybody else. I'm like everybody else. Kechol hagoyim, right? So here, and there, I don't mean to simplify. There are other factors as well, and so on. But the wise people among, or the not so well intended people among the nations, they know that the biggest weapon against us is to have us assimilate. Okay, and historically, assimilation was always highest when it was easy to assimilate, right? So here, and on top of that, the sex drive is also like a big one, and the Jews were pretty much seduced into this first sexually and then into idolatry. So Pinchas acts as a zealous, right? And it's not an act; it's for real. So Rav Steinsaltz discusses this whole thing about jealousy. There's different kinds of jealousy. So there's a jealousy where I see somebody has something, and I'm jealous that why does he have it? Why don't I have it? That's not a kosher jealousy, right? But then there's a jealousy that's actually an expression of an intense love. When two people are intensely in love and they act jealously, it means they care so much about their relationship, about the exclusivity of their relationship, that they have no tolerance for anything that's going to break that exclusivity. Okay? So that's what Hashem is coming to testify about Pinchas, that Pinchas did not act out. It isn't like he was a religious zealot and there's a shake, so I'm going to get him, It was not that at all. It's just that his intensity and his caring about the unique relationship that we have with Hashem was so intense that he had no. If you're cold, there are shawls. By the way, if anybody wants a shawl, okay. But maybe your mother wants to see it.
You want people to watch, though.
Okay, you can do that yourself if your seeds go off. Okay, so I don't know if anyone over here has actually experienced that you can actually relate to it, such an intense love that there's absolutely no tolerance for anything that's going to break that. Okay, I know that know of people that I know somebody that their child had to go into the doctor's office, and I was asked to go in because the mother said that if the doctor's going to give her an injection, she's going to kill him. You know, like you see that with mothers and children. You can see that sometimes, like, you know, like the same loving woman can become the fiercest, right, and the fiercest creature to protect her child from real or perceived danger, right? There's a documented case that happened years ago, documented in the New England Journal of Medicine. This elderly woman was walking with her 6-foot adult son, and he got pinned under a car, and she actually lifted the front end of the car. You know, in other words, when there's a certain fire of love that can also express itself as a fire of jealousy, and it's the same fire.
Yeah, and you also see that like with mother animal that's just giving birth, like even a cow,
Oh yeah.
and she's with a calf, and someone comes up and
or the cats and so on. Like don't you dare go close to
like with a cow and a calf.
It's an instinctual thing, right? So it's an instinctual. It's okay. So it exists in all creatures pretty much, and the connection is a very, very deep connection. Unfortunately, if some people's experience of love is similar to somebody who missed the bus, and he says, "Well, there'll be another bus," And without being judgmental of anybody, but when I went through separation and divorce, like 25 to 30% of my students were also living through divorces in elementary school. And I used to wonder what's going to be with these kids when they grow up. Like, are they going to trust? Are they going to trust getting into a marriage? And I've heard young people say, "Oh, if this marriage will last 5 years, that'll be pretty good," And it's because this wave came down starting in the 50s and the 60s, and it's affected hundreds of thousands of people. This wave of breakups and divorces and so on. And so to us, when we hear of somebody like having such an intense, exclusive bond in a relationship that they have no tolerance for anything that's going to break that. For many people, it sounds like strange. Like are you serious? You love this person so much that you have no tolerance. But it does exist. It is a real thing, Everyone saw Fiddler on the Roof. Do you love me? After 25 years, right? Okay, so it's a paradox, but that's paradox. Something being a paradox doesn't mean that one side cancels the other. They exist at the same time. So that's the thing about Zimri. So Rashi says an interesting thing at the beginning of the Parshat. We go back to the very beginning, verse 10 and 11. So it says, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. So just a couple of verses before, at the end of last week's Parsha, which we read before, it told us, Vayar Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron HaKohen, saw what was going on, and he took action. And now, again, it tells us his name and his father's name and his grandfather's name. So Rashi asks the question, why is the Torah telling us again? Why is it giving us his genealogy again? So Rashi tells us that because the leaders of the other tribes were scorning him, they were saying, have you seen the son of this descendant of this man who used to stuff calves and then sacrifice them to idols, right? Because Pinchas's grandfather was Yisro. And Yitro, before he had converted, he was known to have experience with every idol that was around. So he used to. The leaders of the tribes are saying, "Look at this. He's a descendant of a man who used to stuff animals and slaughter them to idols, and now he comes here and he kills a prince of Israel." So therefore, the Torah tells us again that he was the son of Elazar, he was the son of Aaron HaKohen. So it's explained in Chassidut, and in a Sikh from the Rebbe. What they were saying is like this. They're emphasizing that Avi Imo, his mother's father, used to stuff these animals and then kill them. It's a pretty cruel thing to stuff an animal just to kill it afterwards. Okay, so they're saying that Pinchas, that he had a cruel gene in his blood, or whatever, in his DNA. I don't care. Because and being that a child picks up character traits very much from his mother or her mother, and so being that his mother grew up in a house where she witnessed such cruel behavior, they were claiming that Pinchas was not motivated by an intense love for God, and which manifested in this jealousy, in this an act of jealousy. They were saying that he has a streak of cruelty in him, and this was an opportunity for him to act cruelly. And we've seen, or maybe you haven't, and I don't want to say any Lashon Hara, but it's known that some people use religion as a weapon, right? And against people rather than a means for bringing about love and unity, right? And we've seen examples of it in the past, and we still see it happening, nowadays as well. So it's sort of, as we say, it's natural for people to join societies where the lifestyle is similar to the lifestyle that you want to live. But once we asked Reb Shlomo, we were moving from Outremont, we had to move, and I asked Reb Shlomo about there was an apartment available on a sort of a pretty religious block in Montreal. And I was concerned about moving onto that street because all kinds of people used to come to us on Shabbos, and I didn't want anybody to get harassed or anything like that, and so on. So I asked Reb Shlomo what he thought about me moving there. So he says, you can wear whatever you want and you can live wherever you want as long as you don't cut anyone out, as long as you don't cut anybody off. Right? So there are communities where, like they're sort of like ghettos in a certain sense. Like, oh, you don't belong here. You're not dressed like the rest of us, or you're not as religious as the rest of us, and things like that, and so on. That's one of the beautiful things about Nachlaot, is that it's a really mixed neighborhood, and Baruch Hashem, everybody pretty much gets along pretty well. So that's not the zealousness that the Torah is talking about with Pinchas. That's somebody who's somebody who cuts people out, or like when people go around saying, oh, our brothers and sisters in certain cities over here, they're like not even, I don't even want to repeat it, they don't even consider them to be like their brothers and sisters, or they use terms like Arab Rav and things like that. That's not what we're talking about. if Pinchas would have been like that, the Besdin would have executed him for committing murder. You understand? We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about somebody who loved Hashem and loved his people, and witnessing something that he knew and that everybody else pretty much knew also was extremely detrimental and dangerous to the Jewish people, right? His sharpness, his intense love, just flared in an act of zealousness. And Hashem comes and says, saved everybody. His act of zealousness saved everybody. But otherwise, we don't encourage people to be that way. If you know anybody that starts acting that way, get some help. This is not something that we condone. We don't. If it happens and God intervenes and says, okay, it was meant to be. It was good that it was. That's one thing. And that's one of the explanations why the vav in the word shalom is a broken vav. So Hashem is. So one explanation, like I said before, is Hashem says, "I'm giving him my covenant of peace." It's sort of like Hashem saying, "I'm taking him under my wings," and don't make trouble for him for what he did. Another interpretation, or maybe even goes along with this, is that the vav is broken. It's like Hashem is saying, "Okay, I'm giving him a covenant of peace, but this is not really this is not what I have in mind." Because the shalom is not. There's something missing in this shalom that needs to be completed. Conceptually, when it comes to saving our own lives, right? I was told that one of the first things they teach lifeguards. Are you a lifeguard? No? Anybody? Yeah?
What, as a kid?
I'm saying when you were a kid, you were a trained lifeguard. Mm-hmm. So they one of the first things that they tell lifeguards is don't let the drowning person grab hold of you. Because even if it's a child, they have at that moment, they have what they call a dead man's grip. And you won't be able to, if they grab your hand, or you won't be able to get their hand off. And often the person drowning ends up drowning the person who came to save them.
So we trained a lot to get out of those holes.
Yeah. But
that was a big part of it.
But they tell you, but the best is don't even let them get hold of you.
But if you do, you're supposed to throw something out to them.
Right.
Tell them to grab onto this.
But a former student of mine jumped in, and it was a counselor in camp, and he jumped into ground to save a kid, and the kid drowned him. So there are, in other words, when a person is at that moment where you're fighting desperately for your life, right? So would you say that kid who drowned his counselor, that he was a murderer? Right? He was acting desperately to save his own life, right? And in Halacha we spoke about the Raidif before, that for example, if God forbid a pregnancy is dangerous for the mother is allowed to abort, because the fetus is considered to be a rodef, a pursuer, endangering the life of the mother. Okay? Or if you see somebody running after somebody in the street with a knife, you're allowed to shoot them. You don't have to wait to see if they're going to stab or not stab. It's a rodef. He's a pursuer. He's putting somebody's life in danger. So, unlike in America, where everybody is basically being trained, like, stay away, go hide, don't get involved, and so on. It used to be here in Israel that whenever something happened years ago, people would run to the place where things were happening, right? Nebuch, when we were having all those bombs going off, it turned around, and then a couple of weeks ago there was a story about a soldier running away from the confrontation. Okay? So think about how much love these soldiers have for Eretz Yisrael, and for every one of us, that they are out there putting their lives on the line, right? For Am Yisrael, for Eretz Yisrael. So those of us who haven't been in the army probably have a hard time understanding that. I have a grandson in the army now, my two boys in the army, and it's an amazing thing that like one of them was in a unit that they would spend their nights going hunting for the terrorists, like inside Arab territories. You have to have a very strong connection, And if you've ever been at a wedding where all the chayalim from the guy's unit come to a wedding, it's amazing. How the bond between these people, the bond between these people. Reb Shlomo tells the story about he would, whenever he had a chance, especially after any war, he would go visit the chayalim and in the hospitals, and all the soldiers into the assembly. But some soldiers they couldn't take out of bed, and then Shlomo, after the concert, he would go and visit them individually. And there was this young soldier, and both his arms were shot off. I think this is from the 6-Day War, the Yom Kippur War. And what happened was that his buddy had gotten injured. Remember, she took the guy on his shoulders and ran with him for who knows how far, and saved his life. But as he was running with him, the enemy kept on firing at him, and remember, he lost both arms. And he says to Shlomo, he says, "Did you ever see Avram Avinu?" Shlomo says, "No." He says, "I see Avram Avinu every night. Every night Avram Avinu comes and he sits with me on my bed." And Reb Shlomo says, to merit something like that, like that kind of mesirus nefesh, that kind of devotion, is what brings about something like that, right? So we're not, for saying we, but I can say I, but that kind of intense relationship is what we're talking about over here with Pinchas and Hashem and Am Yisrael. But we're so far from that it's hard for us to relate. It's hard for us to relate over here. Okay? Now, Zimri ben Salu is called Ish Mibnei Yisrael. He was a tzaddik to begin with, to have that position, right? So being a tzaddik doesn't guarantee that you're not going to make mistakes. Okay, and so that's the whole discussion in the Ishbitzer, did Zimri act out of free choice, or well, apparently he did, but but he wasn't stem a lowlife. Okay. I just want to say one thing I saw yesterday in relating to the 3 weeks. So the second verse the opening verse in Psalm 83, it says, Mizmor Asaf, Ach Tov Elokim Yisrael. Hashem is only good to the Jews. And in other words, whatever is coming our way is only from Hashem's goodness, even the harsh things. So the 21 days of the 3 weeks that we're in right now are destined to become days of holidays, Yomim Tovim in the future. And like the Rambam says that all these fast days are going to turn into holidays and so on. So Ach Tov Li Yisrael. So Ach is Aleph Chaf, 21. Tov is 17. So the Rebbe points out that it's interesting that the 21 days of the 3 weeks begin on the 17th of Tammuz, and the gematria of Tov. But Ach Tov is that we have to know that it's all good, but is to say that it's all good doesn't mean that you shouldn't be demanding that we want to see an end to the galut. We want to see an end to the exile already. It's enough already, Ad Mosai, Hashem, how much longer can we go on with this kind of, with all these stories that we have? And it's, we got a call from a friend from Denver yesterday, from Boulder, and who's getting politically involved and so on, and was telling me that things are dangerous in the States. I'm not exactly sure about all the things that she was referring to, but in any case, it's not. It's. I mean, if you look around what's going on in England and in Europe and in different countries in Europe and in places in the States, we see that there's it's not something new. It's been going on for a few years now, but it's just become more and more blatant. And so the fact is that we are still in Golis, we are still in exile, and I don't have to look outside the country. I could look inside the country, and I see that, and we see that there's a need for so much stronger unity amongst us, right? And we know the Gemara says clearly that the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because of sinat chinam, because of baseless hatred. So the teachings all say that we have to, plain and simple, go get back to the place of ahavat chinam, loving each other for no reason. For no reason. Not because you're going to do me a favor, not because you're going to vote for me or whatever, but just for no reason. To mamish have true love for each other. And like the Tzemach Tzedek gives an example of altruistic love. He says, for example, if somebody's cutting a piece of bread and they're not careful and they cut their finger, so what would you say if the person would transfer the knife from the right hand to the left hand and say to the left hand, now go ahead and take revenge on the right hand because the right hand cut you? You say the guy's out of his mind, right? So somebody said, well, that's also for a reason. In other words, the love between the parts of the body is also because it's clearly that if you're going to, that if one part of the body is going to take vengeance on the other part, it's for a reason, because in the end, the whole body is going to suffer, right? But what the Tzemach Tzedek is saying is like this: if somebody cuts himself, he doesn't have to think about why he shouldn't transfer the knife to the other hand and not take revenge on the hand that did the cutting. It's instinctual. That's the kind of love that we need to have for each other. You have to have this instinctual love. If you're living on a street and you know that there's abuse going on in the house next door, and you can't call up your righteous indignation, right? There's something wrong. But we've been raised to be calm, cool, and so on. But what about righteous indignation, right? If you live in a neighborhood that has a 9% crime rate versus a neighborhood that has a 12% crime rate, well, that's fine. That's a pretty good neighborhood by comparison. But what about some righteous indignation of people getting up and saying, we don't want any crime, right? And instead we build these gated communities, right? And as long as it's not affecting me personally, okay. You know, we become so desensitized from these things. You look at the paper almost every second day, there's another horror story, right? And we grow to accept these things when in fact it's the opposite that we need. You know, we need to have some righteous indignation, right? So when you really love someone, and when you really love your people, then you have righteous indignation, and you get up and you take action, and you don't allow terrible things to go on, right? But if I sort of just sort of like I'm grateful that it's not me and and so on, so that means that there's something lacking in my love for my fellow Jew. So we've got work to do. That's basically what we're saying. And if we would have that intense love, then Pinchas wouldn't look so strange to us. But because our love is on the level, like the way Rav Shlomo puts it, there will be another of us. I'll marry somebody else, I'll get into another relationship, etc., etc. So, okay, again, without being judgmental, but it means that there's something really missing in what you've got right now. So we should be blessed to know. We should be blessed to know what real deep love is. When I would walk with Reb Shlomo on Broadway, and I saw with my own eyes like how he would hug anybody and everybody without any hesitation. People that you wouldn't want to go closer than 20 feet to them because you already could smell the fragrance. He would embrace them and kiss them and be most loving. Because he had that intense love for every neshama. So all that chitzoniyut, all that superficial stuff didn't get in the way. So if we see if I don't have tolerance for certain people, it's not their fault. It means I'm lacking in my real Ahavat Yisrael. That's the big thing. Just want to say a word of explanation that